Learning English can feel difficult, but stories make it easier. When you listen to a real story like this one, your brain learns naturally. You enjoy the story, and at the same time, you understand how English works. That's the magic of storytelling. So if you want to keep learning English in a fun way, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell. We post new stories every day. Let's begin. The refugee crisis had been building for years. People from war-torn countries were leaving everything behind: homes, jobs, even families, just to find safety. They were walking across borders, sleeping in tents, and hoping for a better life. Some reached Europe. Others tried to cross into the United States. And that's where things became more complicated. When Donald Trump came back into the news after a quiet period, few people expected what happened next. He gave a speech one morning that surprised everyone. He said he wanted to meet real refugees and understand their story. Some believed he was trying to change his image. Others thought it was a political game. But one thing was clear: the world was watching. The first group of refugees he met had come from Central America. They had traveled for weeks. Some walked through deserts. Others crossed rivers with small children in their arms. When they finally reached the U.S. border, they were tired, hungry, and scared. But they still had hope. Trump arrived at the refugee center at around 3 in the afternoon. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. Instead, he wore a simple jacket and jeans. That alone shocked the media. He walked into the room where the refugees were waiting and looked around. The cameras were rolling, but he didn't smile. He just nodded and sat down. Instead of giving a long speech, he listened. He sat across from a young woman named Carla who had left her village after a gang attacked her family. She spoke through a translator, but her face said more than words ever could. She was only 22, but her eyes looked older. She told him about sleeping on the ground, eating only once a day, and being afraid every night. Trump didn't interrupt her. He looked at her carefully, sometimes leaning forward as she spoke. People watching on television couldn't believe what they were seeing. This was not the Trump they remembered from loud rallies and angry tweets. This was different. He was quiet, almost thoughtful. After Carla, he listened to a father named Miguel who had lost his job when his town's factory closed. Gangs had moved in, and his son was threatened if he didn't join them. So Miguel took his family and left. They traveled at night, hid during the day, and crossed 3 countries before reaching the U.S. border. He had never broken a law. He had worked hard all his life. All he wanted now was safety. Trump asked a few questions, simple ones. How old are your kids? Where did you sleep? What are you hoping for? He didn't argue. He didn't speak about walls or policies. He just listened. After the meeting, the media was full of opinions. Some said he was trying to win support before the next election. Others said he had changed after being out of office. But nobody knew for sure. What was clear, though, was that something about that meeting had stayed with him. The next morning, Trump met with a group of lawyers and advisors. He asked them what could be done for families like Miguel's. The answers were complicated. There were rules, laws, and political pressures. But Trump didn't talk about building walls this time. He talked about creating a temporary program, a place where families could live safely while their asylum cases were processed. The idea was not popular with everyone. Some of his old supporters didn't like it. They felt betrayed. But Trump kept going. He said he wasn't changing sides, he was just trying to be fair. He said America could still be strong and also be human. As the days went by, more meetings were held. Refugees were invited to speak. Reporters followed every move. Some called it a new chapter. Others said it wouldn't last. But behind the scenes, something real was happening. Trump had started a conversation that no one expected, one that brought people from both sides of the argument to the same table. Meanwhile, outside the refugee centers, protests began. Some people held signs supporting Trump's new approach. Others shouted that he was doing too little too late. But inside the centers, refugees felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. There was one boy, around 10 years old, who gave Trump a small drawing. It showed a house with a tree and a family standing together. Above the house, in big letters, the boy had written one word: "Be safe." Trump took the picture and held it for a moment. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. That night, when reporters asked him how he felt after the meeting, he didn't give a big answer. He just said, "I heard things I hadn't heard before." Then he walked away. That simple sentence was repeated on every news channel. People didn't know exactly what he meant, but it sounded honest. For the first time in a long time, Trump wasn't just reacting. He was reflecting. You've just followed a powerful real-life story and, without realizing it, learned so many useful English patterns, conditionals, past tenses, descriptions, and more. That's the power of stories. Every day, you get smarter and more fluent by listening to something interesting. So if you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it with others learning English. We post new stories every day. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if you were in Trump's position? We want to hear your thoughts. After the first meeting with the refugees, something began to shift in Trump's schedule. Normally, his days were filled with phone calls, interviews, and political strategy. But now, he started asking for more updates about the refugee centers. He wanted numbers, names, stories. It wasn't just about policy anymore, it was becoming personal. Behind closed doors, his team was surprised. One of his advisors even joked that he had grown a heart. Others were more careful. They warned him that helping refugees too openly could hurt his position among his strongest supporters. But Trump didn't stop. He continued asking questions. That week, he visited a second center, this time in Arizona. The sun was hot, the air dry, and the tents full. Over 500 people were living there, waiting for legal answers that might take months. Some children were sick. Some parents were losing hope. The mood was heavy, but when Trump walked in, everyone turned to look. He shook hands with a doctor who had been volunteering at the center. The doctor explained how difficult it was to care for so many people with so few supplies. Trump nodded and promised to send more medical aid. It was a small promise, but it mattered. Then he met a man named Saeed, who had escaped violence in Syria. Saeed had been a teacher back home. Now he slept on a mat next to 20 strangers. His wife was still in a refugee camp in Turkey, and he hadn't spoken to her in months. He didn't cry as he told his story, but his voice shook. Trump asked him what he wanted most. Saeed answered in broken English, "To live. To see my wife. To teach again." It was a simple answer, but it stayed with Trump. Back in Washington, politicians were growing nervous. Some of them began speaking out. They accused Trump of being weak. Others said he was trying to play both sides. But for once, Trump didn't argue back. He ignored the noise. He kept visiting centers. He kept talking to real people. Some news channels followed every move. Others refused to cover the story at all. But people were watching online. Refugees who had lost hope began to feel noticed. They shared pictures. They recorded videos. Some even wrote messages saying, "Thank you for listening." Still, not everyone was pleased. In one city, a protest turned violent. People shouted that America couldn't take any more refugees. They blamed them for crime, for job losses, for everything. Trump saw the footage that night. His face was tight, his eyes focused. But he didn't say anything right away. Instead, the next morning, he called a quiet meeting with a small group of former refugees who had now become American citizens. He wanted to hear their full story, what helped them succeed, what challenges they faced, and what advice they had for the newcomers. One woman, now a nurse, said she had arrived with no money and no English. But she worked night shifts, studied during the day, and eventually found her place. "I am American now," she said. "But I remember every step." That sentence hit something deep. Trump leaned back in his chair and stayed silent for a moment. Then he looked around the room and said, "Maybe we need more of these stories. Not just numbers. Stories." Later that day, he tweeted a short message, "America is strong enough to help the innocent. Let's find a way to do both, protect and support." That tweet went viral. It shocked his critics and confused his supporters. But it also opened a new door. The next few days were intense. Trump proposed a pilot program, something small, limited, but symbolic. He wanted to set up 5 safe shelters across the country where refugee families could stay while their applications were processed. These shelters would offer language classes, health checks, and temporary jobs. The reaction was immediate. Some governors agreed. Others refused. The debate grew louder. Television shows invited experts. Social media exploded. People were no longer just watching. They were choosing sides. But in the middle of all this, something important happened. A group of high school students from a small town in Texas started a campaign to collect books and toys for the children in the refugee shelters. Their message was simple: they are just kids. Let's welcome them. Trump saw the video and asked his team to invite the students to the White House. They came, nervous but proud. They shared their message and gave him a box full of letters written by children to refugee kids. One said, "I don't know your language, but I hope we can be friends." Trump held the letter up for the cameras. Then he looked at the students and said, "This is leadership." Outside, the world was still divided. But inside that moment, something felt possible. By the end of that week, Trump had visited 3 different shelters, spoken with over 50 refugees, and held meetings with people from all sides: legal experts, faith leaders, business owners, and even past presidents. The room didn't always agree. Voices were raised. But the fact that they were meeting at all was a change. People started asking a big question: was this a real shift in Trump's thinking, or just a temporary show? Even those closest to him weren't sure. But what they did know was this: he was finally listening. And that, in itself, was more than many had expected. By listening to this part of the story, you picked up even more powerful English skills: reported speech, emotional tone, transition phrases, and more. And the best part is, you did it naturally without even noticing. That's how language learning should feel. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell your friends about it. And don't forget to comment below: do you think one person can change a national policy just by listening? We'd love to hear your opinion. As the days passed, Trump's team began working on the details of the refugee shelter plan. It wasn't easy. Every step came with arguments about money, about safety, about who should be allowed in. But something had changed in Trump's voice. He was no longer shouting. He was asking. One of his advisors said something surprising in a press briefing. The president is exploring new ways to balance strength with compassion. That sentence made headlines around the world. In private, Trump seemed more focused than ever. He stopped attending big events and started joining closed-door meetings with people who rarely got invited before: refugee coordinators, trauma experts, even teenagers who had crossed the border alone. During one meeting, he was shown a short video of children drawing pictures of the homes they missed. One little girl had drawn her mother holding a baby. Under the picture, she had written in Spanish, "I miss you every night." Trump stared at the screen for a long time. Then he turned to his staff and said, "Let's do more." Outside the White House, things were tense. Immigration protests filled the streets of major cities. Some people waved signs that said, "Refugees welcome." Others demanded stricter laws. Police stood between them. The country felt split in half. But Trump didn't stop. He called for a national roundtable, a rare event that brought together people from every side of the issue. There were former border agents, church leaders, immigrants who had become citizens, and governors from both parties. The meeting was long, sometimes emotional, and full of disagreement. But for the first time, people were talking, not just yelling. Trump listened more than he spoke. He asked real questions like, what are we doing wrong, and what would make this fair for everyone? He didn't promise anything that day. But he made one thing clear: I'm not here to win points. I'm here to fix something that's been broken too long. That sentence was replayed over and over on television. Some people still didn't believe him. Others felt hopeful for the first time. Either way, the conversation had moved forward. Behind the scenes, plans for the first shelter were moving fast. A site was chosen near the Texas border. The location used to be a training center for disaster relief, so it already had kitchens, beds, and bathrooms. Now, it would become a safe place for families waiting on asylum decisions. Workers began preparing the space. Local volunteers joined in. A nearby school offered to send teachers part-time. A local clinic offered to provide medical help. Even some business owners stepped forward to offer jobs for adult refugees who had legal permission to work. When Trump arrived to visit the site, he was met with mixed reactions. Some people cheered. Others stayed silent. But everyone watched closely as he walked through the building. He checked the kitchens. He looked inside the classrooms. He spoke quietly to the workers and asked about the timeline. Later that evening, he spoke to the press outside. "This is not about politics," he said. "It's about people. It's about kids who deserve to feel safe while we figure things out." That line was shared across the internet. It surprised people. It even softened the tone of some of his biggest critics. Still, not everyone was convinced. In a live interview, one refugee rights advocate said, "One shelter won't solve the crisis. But maybe, just maybe, it's the first step toward something better." And maybe it was. Because after that, things began moving faster. For more shelters were approved within a week. Each one was built in a different part of the country, not just near the border. This time, Trump wanted people in different states to see the situation with their own eyes. At the same time, a new media campaign started. Short videos showed stories of refugees who had become teachers, nurses, engineers. Trump even agreed to be part of one video, something nobody expected. In it, he simply said, "Every life has value. Every story matters." It was short, but it went viral. Inside the shelters, families began arriving. Children played with donated toys. Parents joined English classes. Some started job training. The spaces weren't perfect, there were still long waits and not enough staff, but they were better than the tents and the fear they had left behind. One little boy, about 6 years old, was asked how he felt after arriving. He answered in Spanish, but someone translated for the camera, "I feel like I can sleep without being afraid." That sentence was printed on newspapers across the country the next morning. Meanwhile, Trump's political opponents stayed quiet for a while. Many were unsure how to respond. They didn't want to praise him, but they also didn't want to attack something that was clearly helping people. His allies, on the other hand, were divided. Some supported his efforts. Others felt he was giving in. But Trump kept repeating the same message: this isn't left or right. It's right or wrong. He even began working on a plan for better legal processing, faster, fairer, and more transparent. It was a big task. Many before him had tried and failed. But now, with the public more focused than ever, the opportunity was real. Inside the shelters, stories continued. A mother who had walked through 2 countries finally received her first phone call from the U.S. Immigration Office. A teenage boy who had been living in fear began writing poems in English. A small group of kids started practicing for a school play. These were small moments, but they mattered. Trump visited one shelter again near the end of the month. There he was handed a handmade card. It had stick figures, hearts, and the word "thank you" written in 5 different languages. He smiled, held up the card, and said to the press, "This is better than polls." That evening, in a rare moment of reflection, he told one reporter, "I thought I understood this issue. But I was wrong. You don't understand until you sit with the people." That sentence was simple, but powerful. Right now, you've naturally learned how to express opinions, report facts, use comparisons, and show emotion, all in English. That's why learning through stories works so well. It helps you feel the language, not just memorize it. If you want more stories like this, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell. And we want to hear from you. What story or issue do you think deserves more attention today? Leave a comment below. We read all of them. By the start of the new month, the refugee shelters were running. Not perfectly, but better than anyone had expected. Across the country, stories were spreading, stories of families being treated with dignity, of children finally sleeping in warm beds, of teenagers learning their first English words. But it wasn't enough. More people were arriving every day. The shelters were almost full. Trump knew that something bigger had to change. A shelter was a bandage. The wound was deeper. In a private conversation with a group of advisors, Trump said something unexpected: "Maybe we need to go to the source." Nobody knew what he meant at first. But within days, Trump had requested reports on the refugee situation in Latin America, the Middle East, and parts of Africa. He wanted to understand why people were leaving, not just how they were arriving. This shift surprised everyone. Until then, most discussions had been about borders and walls. Now, the focus was moving toward causes: war, poverty, corruption, and natural disasters. Trump arranged meetings with leaders from Central America. It wasn't a press event. There were no cameras. Just a table, translators, and notebooks. The conversations were intense but respectful. Leaders explained how weak economies, rising crime, and climate change were pushing people to flee. They asked for support, not just money, but investment in jobs, education, and safety. Trump listened carefully. For someone known for fast opinions, he was now slowing down. Later, he spoke to the press again. We spend billions controlling the border. Maybe it's time we spent something fixing the reason people run. That line was powerful. It echoed in international news. Some praised it. Some doubted it. But it sparked a new discussion. Back in the US, a plan was taking shape. Trump's team began designing a new kind of agreement, not just with border control, but with development at its core. The idea was simple: help stabilize regions so people could stay home safely. It wouldn't stop all migration. But maybe it could reduce the desperation. Meanwhile, inside the refugee shelters, something even more powerful was happening. Refugees were beginning to organize. They weren't protesting. They were contributing. Some were cleaning spaces, helping with childcare, or teaching others their language. It wasn't asked, they just did it. One morning in the shelter near Arizona, a former school principal from Honduras began teaching math to a group of kids using chalk and an old whiteboard. No one told him to do it. He just missed teaching. That moment was caught on camera and shared online. It became a symbol of resilience, of dignity, of human strength. Trump saw the video and smiled. "These people don't want a free ride," he said quietly to his chief of staff. "They just want a chance." Then came the moment of real decision. Congress was preparing to vote on a new immigration bill. It was full of compromises: faster asylum processing, investment in home country aid, and a larger number of legal refugee spots each year. The bill wasn't perfect. It had critics on both sides. But it was historic. Trump had to choose: support it or kill it with one tweet. That evening he sat alone in the Oval Office. Reports were on the table. His phone was in his hand. Outside, the lights of Washington glowed quietly. For once he didn't call anyone. He didn't post anything. He just thought. He remembered the girl's drawing. The boy's whisper that he could sleep without fear. The nurse who had said, "I am American now." The protests, the praise, the pressure. Then he picked up a pen and signed a letter of support for the bill. He also recorded a short video message: "This is not about giving in. It's about rising up, as a nation that helps, protects, and leads. Refugees are not the enemy. Fear is." The next day the bill passed. Not by a huge margin, but enough. Reactions were instant. Some people cried. Others screamed. Some called it a betrayal. Others called it courage. But no one ignored it. Inside the shelters, cheers broke out. A few volunteers cried in relief. Many refugees didn't understand all the details, but they knew something important had happened. Over the following weeks, a quiet but steady change began. New legal pathways opened. Border pressure dropped slightly. International aid programs received fresh funding. Even neighboring countries began considering similar shelter systems. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't the end. But it was a beginning. In a final press conference on the topic, Trump stood behind the podium. His words were measured, calm, and direct. "This issue is not over. But we've taken a step, not left, not right, but forward. And I hope future leaders keep going." He didn't smile. He didn't boast. He simply walked off the stage and didn't take questions. That image, of Trump walking away in silence after one of the most unexpected moves of his political career, stayed in people's minds for a long time. Some said he changed. Some said he only changed his strategy. But one thing was clear: for a few short months, a conversation that had been full of anger turned into something else, something human. And in that space, Thousands of people, refugees, teachers, doctors, kids, volunteers found hope. Not just in policies, but in the fact that someone finally had listened. Congratulations, by finishing this story, you absorbed natural English patterns like cause and effect, past continuous, opinion expressions, and formal tone without even trying. That's the power of learning through story. And the best part? There's a new story every day. If you enjoyed this experience, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who wants to learn English the fun way. And now it's your turn. Leave a comment below and tell us, do you think real change is possible through listening? We want to hear your thoughts.